Hello and welcome back for another GiantSlayerTV Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 12.5b. We're back again to take a second look at where the champion meta has developed for patch 12.5. A lot has happened for such a long patch, with a massive B patch and a much smaller C patch for bug fixes. Some of the meta has remained the same, but the top 10 champions have definitely changed over time. Let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Kicking off our top 10, we have Warwick coming in at number 10. What's that sound? Is that an ow we hear off in the distance? It certainly is, as Warwick is patrolling the meta, though thankfully it's not quite War Week. In fact, Warwick reroll isn't even that strong of the build most of the time. The main reason we're highlighting Warwick is because he does well as a consistent early game item holder that you can choose to reroll for. Of course, to pull off a Warwick reroll board, you need the correct items and augments to do well. Oh, and the simple task of hitting Warwick 3 is relatively quickly. If those pieces of the Warwick puzzle come together, then great, you've earned a top 4. If not, well, it's gonna be a struggle. Warwick reroll aside, this champion brings a lot to the early game because he can hold onto most auto attack items effectively. Warwick is also amazing at chewing through front lines, particularly beefy front lines like bruisers, which are common in the early game. Chemtech tends to do well early on as well, since a lot of the champions are low cost, meaning 2-starring them is easy. There's also the shared synergies between Warwick and Tryndamere, making them a great early game duo. Overall, Warwick isn't the best champion in the meta, but he has left a mark that we can't ignore. Returning from our previous top 10, we have Gnar coming in at number 9. Of the Yordles in the meta, Gnar provides much more than just damage or some frontlining. What Gnar provides is Socialite. While that doesn't sound huge, it is worth considering quite a few compositions in the meta do use Socialite. Gnar, being a 3 cost, is easy to 2-star in the mid game and fits onto most boards, particularly boards utilizing Aurelia. That combo between Gnar and Aurelia is really what adds value to Gnar in the meta. Beyond that, Gnar is just a solid champion in general. Thanks to his ability, Gnar gains quite a bit of extra health after transforming and does a surprisingly large amount of damage when throwing his rock. This makes him a fantastic early game item holder, since you can give him all sorts of items ranging from damage to defense, and they'll all be effective on him. Or you can simply just use Gnar for one of his 3 synergies, as the 3 synergy champions almost always have a lot of priority. As for Gnar carry, well, it's certainly playable, but we don't recommend it most of the time. If you're playing Yordles, then sure, Gnar 3 is probably your best option next to Corki 3, but this strategy is not consistent. Instead, focus on using Gnar for his synergies in the early game and pairing him alongside Aurelia later on. It wouldn't be a top 10 without Echo showing up on our list, as the consistent lad from Arcane comes in at number 8. Honestly, at this point, it may be worth considering Echo as an honorary member of the top 10 club from now on until the end of set 6. Of course, future balancing may prevent that, but in general, Echo is by far one of the most consistently used champions in every meta. That consistency cannot be overlooked, and it's thanks to the teeny tiny addition of a certain synergy, Innovator. Echo being an Innovator allows him to bridge the gap between a lot of synergies, which helps Innovator be one of the most played synergies in the meta. Twitch reroll works mainly because of Echo being an Innovator. Playing Scrap early on is much better with an Echo and helps tag in other Scrap champions later on in the game, like Aurelia and Jinx. Few other champions bring together a board as effectively as Echo does. On top of that, Echo is a decent unit on his own because his ability can either buff your units or debuff enemy units. With it being a fairly large AoE, Echo is also an effective item holder for Morellonomicon. Being an assassin also means Frozen Heart is great on him, giving him even more utility. All in all, Echo is a champion we recommend everyone be familiar with utilizing, because being able to effectively play him opens up a ton of options. Even with the 3-cost theme, the number 7 champion on today's list is Lucian. Let's talk Twinshot. Twinshot is one of the more common synergies in the current meta, largely thanks to how many carries the synergy has available. There's Gangplank, Lucian, Corki, and Jinx, all of which are viable to play as the main damage dealer, depending on items and other factors. Of those, Lucian is by far the most reliable. Not only can Lucian carry with Twinshot, but he's also an effective item holder throughout the game, making him a fantastic champion to transition from. Mostly this is because Lucian does consistent damage, even without perfect items. Corki needs to be level 3 with full items to do anything, and Gangplank is quite hit or miss on effectiveness. Jinx is the second best in terms of damage dealing, but being a 5 cost is not particularly reliable to 2-star. That leaves Lucian to be used either as the main carry for Twinshot or just an item holder. Hextech may be dead past stage 3, but it's still usable before then, especially with an early Lucian. As for items, well, generally Lucian is considered an AP carry, but you can also give him auto attack items, particularly something universal like Giant Slayer. Point is, Lucian is a versatile 3-cost item holder with potential to carry if you 3-star him, and that's what earns him a spot in our top 10. We're not done with the 3-cost champions just yet, as we have Malzahar coming in at number 6. Malzahar is possibly the champion affected most by mutations. Well, at least for baseline mutants, as there's plenty of champions that effectively use a mutant emblem. What we're mostly referring to is Synaptic Web for Malzahar because it takes a well-rounded 3-cost champion and turns it into a machine gun-wielding death machine. Mutants in general have a weird place in the meta because there's no control over which mutation is applied from game to game. One person can go by 10 games without ever seeing a Synaptic Web, which means Malzahar likely won't be that high on priority. But another player may see that mutation every other game. Of course, it's not like the other mutations are unplayable, but are definitely less appealing when compared to Synaptic Web. With Synaptic Web, Malzahar is God tier. Without it, he's still a decent champion, but nowhere near as effective. That difference is why we're not rating Malzahar higher on the list, but we can't ignore how good he can be with the right mutation. Much like Mutant, it's difficult to accurately rate where Malzahar is in the current meta. Finally, we can move away from 3-cost units and talk about a 4-cost carry. Coming in number 5, we have Ahri. It seems that AP is having a resurgence in the meta between Synaptic Malzahar, Corki Lucian Twinshot, and Ahri. There are even other various AP item holders like Orianna and Seraphine that, while not full-on carries, at least help with AP damage in the meta. But out of all of those champions, Ahri remains the most consistent AP option in the meta. Why is that? For one, building a board around her isn't too difficult as most of the champions are low cost. Either you're adding a lot of Arcanists or a mixture of Arcanist and Syndicate. Ahri is really the only hard to 2-star champion, and even then she's not overly contested. Items are slightly harder to be consistent with, but honestly, as long as you have blue buff and Giant Slayer, Ahri will do damage. Augments also play a huge role, such as Runic Shield to keep your Arcanist alive longer, or Battle Mage to make use of positioning Ahri near the front line. But what has helped the most is that Ahri's orbs can actually hit the same target multiple times instead of being spread out like crazy. Of course, the downsides to Ahri still apply. She needs a lot of time to ramp up, but a good frontline generally solves that issue. Overall, Ahri isn't the best carry in the meta, but if you have AP items and want consistency, Ahri is the champion for you. Another 4-cost carry is Draven, who comes in at number 4. There's a major downside to Draven we must address, and that's consistency. While Draven can be a great carry, he can also be a huge letdown. Think of Draven as a diva. He needs a lot of attention to play his role well, and without that attention, your board is doomed. That means you need to have good items, augments, a well-rounded composition, and of course, being a diva, Draven must be VIP. When all of the ducks are lined up perfectly, Draven is an insanely efficient carry, sitting in the back throwing axes non-stop and dishing out a ton of damage. So if you're willing to play Draven, you must also know exactly how to build a board around him, otherwise Draven will be far less effective than a lot of other carries. Our recommendation is to always make sure he's a VIP and have at least a Giant Slayer as an item. Everything else should come together on its own, but without those two things, Draven is not worth playing. Our final 3-cost champion for the day comes in at number 3, Senna. That's right, Senna is back again and has gone up a tiny bit in value. This is mostly because the meta is more well-defined, and it's quite clear that a Socialite Enchanter champion is worth a lot in the meta that values both of those traits. Much like Gnar, Senna is splashed into a lot of compositions because of Socialite, and that makes her a common companion to Aurelia. But unlike Gnar, Senna also adds utility with her healing ability and Enchanter, which helps open up a player's board to other utility units like Orianna. That said, it is worth noting that Senna carry isn't common anymore. It's playable in niche scenarios, but in general, Senna is used for her utility and synergies more so than dishing out damage. That said, Senna is great in the early and mid-game as an item holder, so you can still effectively use her in that way. But it is recommended to transition into more common 4-cost carry like Draven, Aurelia, or Sivir instead of sticking with Senna all game. Just be sure to have a replacement Senna ready to add back in, as she's still plenty valuable even without items. Finally, we're into our top 2, and it's 2 familiar faces from our last top 10. Coming in at number 2, we have Orianna. Previously, Orianna was number 1 on our list, and honestly, she still could be. But we didn't take into account how god-tier Aurelia would end up being, so unfortunately, Orianna only takes silver this time. Same reasons we had Orianna in first last time are the same reasons we have her in second this time. Strong utility, capable of dealing damage, and 2 fantastic splash traits. In fact, the value of Clockwork has gone up even more as you can play Orianna with Zillion and Innovators, Orianna and Camille for Draven, or Orianna and Jhin to provide extra damage and Clockwork for a variety of compositions. Notice how Orianna is always in these pairings? Yep, that's what makes her so good. All in all, any board could be improved by utilizing Orianna even without Clockwork active. And coming in at number 1 is the shocking twist of our top 10. No, just kidding, it's Irelia. Yes, this shouldn't be a shock since we've basically been non-stop praising Irelia throughout the top 10. Irelia is just too darn good as a damage dealer, at least currently. With a few items, she can bounce around the battlefield with resets and take down even the beefiest of front lines without too much issue. By far what helps Irelia be so versatile in the meta is how she can be played in a wide assortment of comps. All you really need is Irelia, Gnar, and 1 or 2 more Socialite champions. Then you build whatever you want around them, such as Innovators, Strikers, or just utility. It's also worth noting that the potential downside for Irelia was the mana lock bug, but guess what? It was fixed. Keep in mind that Irelia is often heavily contested, so forcing Irelia may be difficult. But if you can find her and have good items, we definitely recommend building a comp around her. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. There's honestly a lot of viable champions in the meta, so unfortunately we don't have an honorable mentions list this week. If we did, it would be almost as long as our top 10. Let us know in the comment section below what your favorite champions are after so many weeks of being on the 12.5 patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.